Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to Unit 1 of our class together. I am glad you're here and welcome officially to the start of class. By now, you've probably had the chance to look around the Canvas site and gotten a sense of what the class looks like. Hopefully, had a chance to familiarize yourself with the syllabus and the course policies, the course texts. That's really important because we're already moving quickly into several course texts over this next week. It's important that you have those purchased, you have access to them, and you're able to do the course readings. I want to make it really clear you're not going to be able to get what you need out of the class without the course texts. So I recommend getting those earlier rather than later. And you can find the links to those online through the bookstore and Duquesne bookstore, or you can find them there if you're on campus. So that's an important thing to note. Also important, if you haven't already had the chance to speak with your fellow group members, make sure and do that so that you can coordinate the assignments that you have in this course. Group work is a important and rather large component of this class, and so it's important to connect early and to make sure that you have a good foundation for moving forward with your fellow group members. And finally, in the syllabus, I really recommend going over the assignment types so you're familiar with that, know what to expect, and the course schedule. The course schedule is really important because it's where you can see on a weekly basis what's happening in each unit, what assignments are due. You'll see there's like a three sort of layout thing to the schedule where you've got the date, the topic for the day, or for the unit, and then the assignments and the readings that are due. So that's a really helpful area, and I recommend whenever you have a question going back, not just to the Canvas site, but most importantly, the syllabus is really your guide for this. So that's my recommendation. The Canvas is laid out so that it's hopefully accurate and helpful, but with technology, you never fully know what's going to happen. This syllabus is going to be a good guiding compass for you. Okay, so for this week, I'll kind of give you a rundown of what you're doing here in Unit 1. And as always, if you have questions, please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk with you and try to interface on how we can help. So for Unit 1, we've got a couple of things going on here. So first, the readings that are due for Unit 1, you're going to see that over in the right-hand side of the syllabus. You have the Crutchfield and Grant book. This is chapters 1 and 2. This is for all students, chapters 1 and 2 of Crutchfield and Grant. And then the Powell and Bromley book, chapters 1, 2, and 20 for graduate students. A note here about the Powell and Bromley book for graduate students who are taking the 500 level version of this course. You'll notice you have extra reading that kind of stacks on as opposed to those who are taking the undergrad version of this class. And the point of this is to give you more exposure to graduate level sources, to academic focused sources. And the other sources we're going through have some academic aspects to them, but many of them are geared toward practitioners, whereas the essays that are written in the Powell and Bromley book are very academic sometimes in nature, and they're a little bit more dense too. There is a lot of helpful content in there, but you may find yourself having to read in such a way that is kind of more the sort of way that you might read at a graduate level, right? You're not necessarily taking notes on everything. You're finding a few things that stand out to you, and this is especially for the graduate students reading in such a way as to be able to pull out 3 to 5 important things from the chapter, maybe taking some notes, highlighting, getting a general gist, and continuing to move forward is helpful so you don't find yourself getting stuck. That was something I had to learn early on in my graduate journey. So if you have questions about that, please reach out to me. But those are the readings for this unit, for Unit 1. Crutchfield and Grant, chapters 1 and 2 for all students, undergrad and graduate. And then the graduate students have, in addition, chapters 1, 2, and 20. All right, assignments. First is watch the instructor lecture, which you're already doing right now. So congratulations. You can check that off the list. Then discussion board posts for Unit 1. So after watching this, I encourage you to head on over to the discussion boards, and you can see a little bit more about what goes into the discussion board if you have any thoughts or questions about that. Um, I will say that what I'm really looking for in that kind of assignment is a short reflection about the readings for the week and a thought or a comment that's left on another person's post. There's those two elements that's really important. So your own comment about the readings and then a comment on someone else's post, right? And on your post that you're posting yourself, you should be looking at 2 to 3 concepts that stood out to you and briefly explaining them, including references, right? Page number if you can, and then connecting it to nonprofit and philanthropy, especially if you can include a link to a news story or to a journal article, something that's on nonprofits that connects to one or more of your concepts. That could be really helpful. What we're trying to do is bring two things into conversation with one another. Theory, so communication theory from our textbooks, nonprofit theory, academic sort of language about philanthropy, and we're bringing it into conversation with practice, with the real world and the things that we observe. So that's the point of the discussion boards. So we have discussion board assignment for Unit 1 for this week. And then we also have the reading quiz for Unit 1, which you can find online, as well as this is a limited portion of you have the Group 1's presentation for Unit 2 is due along with these assignments, right? So this is an important note in your group work. You're going to have to do some of the readings for the week that come up that's coming up, if that makes any sense. So, for example, if group 1 is presenting readings for unit 2, they need to look at the reading schedule that's laid out for the following week and pull that together based on the options there. And you can see some more in the assignment about how that works and some examples. But again, be looking out for the week ahead because that's the presentation and the readings that you're working on for that coming week. Yeah. And again, trying to keep it kind of to a limited sort of thing. That's why you're working in a group together, and you're not expected to present all of the chapters that we're reading. So I hope that's helpful. And please reach out if you have any questions, especially for those of you in group 1. You'll be looking at making sure that at least one of you from your group is submitting that compiled video file by the time all of the assignments are due. All assignments for Unit 1 are due on 1/19. That's Sunday, the 19th of January at 11:59 p.m. And what's nice about our class is that almost all assignments, unless otherwise noted, there's a week around Easter time that's a little odd. But other than that, they're all due on Sundays at the end of the unit at 11:59 p.m. And I will say it's important that you get those in on time. I don't accept late work, so that's something to take note of as you're beginning this assignment journey. Instead, my preference is to talk with you. If you see that you're going to have an issue, reach out to me. I'm happy to work with you. If for some reason the circumstances justify an extension, I'm happy to talk with you about that. And I know life happens, so things unexpected, family emergencies, work emergencies, whatever it is. But part of life, especially in the professional realm and in the nonprofit realm, is communication. And as much as you can proactively communicate, the better. So if you have a question though and concerned about something, please bring it up to me, and I'm happy to talk with you and try to see how we can best find a path forward. Okay, so those are the assignments for the week, the readings for the week. If anything is confusing on Canvas or you can't find it, please, again, reach out to me. I'm always happy to help. And yeah, good luck as you're working on assignments. Now, with the time we have left here, I want to move over to a conversation about some of the readings for today. In these lecture videos, I expect you to do the reading, so I'm assuming that as you're watching this, you have done or are going to do the reading. And this is not a replacement for the reading, but instead it's meant as a supplement. It's meant to have conversation. If we were in a physical classroom, I'd be talking with you right now. We'd be laughing together. And so it's a little different here in a virtual environment. But I'm going to do my best to try to my goal is to open up the material. I'm doing the readings alongside you. I am familiar with this material from having taught the class before. A lot of this touches on things that I've experienced in the professional realm. And what I'm trying to do is find ways to that we can together kind of find a way of talking about this. And so you'll notice that I don't hit every subject that was covered in the readings, in the lectures, but I'm pulling out the things that stood out to me, and hopefully that will help you start thinking as well as you're going through this. Okay? Yeah. All right. So the subject for this week is kind of a broad 30,000 foot view of the nonprofit sector. And it's titled Forces for Good and Advocacy, which are common themes in all the readings, in both the undergraduate, all the general student readings, as well as the graduate student readings. And with this, I thought one of the really interesting pieces from the Powell and Bromley book, is the question towards the very beginning is what is the nonprofit sector? And that seems like a really good place to start. I don't know what background you're bringing to this class. Maybe you have a lot of familiarity with nonprofits. Maybe you've been volunteering in one since you were in grade school. Maybe you maybe you are someone who's been employed by a nonprofit for years. And maybe you're someone who has worked in a particular sector and you feel really comfortable maybe with education-based nonprofits, but you haven't had any experience with religious or faith-based nonprofits. And so that's a mystery to you. Or maybe you've kind of done it all and you're interested in getting kind of a deeper view of the fundraising side of things or a different aspect, not necessarily a different kind of nonprofit, but a different unit within a nonprofit, right? Maybe you've been involved in marketing and you want to better look at grant writing, right? There's a lot of different things that we're going to be covering in the class, but with all that in mind, you might also be coming to this class with very little experience with the nonprofit organization. And maybe you're in a place where you're curious about it, but you haven't really interacted with nonprofits in the past. That is okay. Please don't be intimidated by this class. This is a class where we're learning together. And the wonderful thing about this topic is that it's so intertwined in our lives here in the States that there are a lot of ways of beginning to learn about nonprofits and care about the work they're doing. I guarantee you, if you have an interest or a hobby in something, that might be a way of finding your interest in nonprofits. So back to this question, what is the nonprofit sector? Whatever your experience is with nonprofits, it's helpful to have some ground rules, some foundations laid out first. So nonprofits in the US sit in this interesting in between. They're different than, and there's a lot of other categories we could look at, but kind of two other big buckets in terms of organizations in the US are governmental organizations. That means that they are funded directly by taxpayer dollars. They're going to fall somewhere in the hierarchy of either local, regional, state, or national governance, somewhere, right? At the end of the day, someone either from the mayor's office, the head of the county's office, the governor's office, or the president's office is going to be in charge of that, right? Like somewhere, the buck stops with someone in one of those offices, right? It's governmental in some way. Um, And there are a lot of examples of organizations that are government agencies that you might not think of at first, right? So this could be whether it's a K through 12 school in your local community that's going to be funded by government dollars. It's going to often be run by a district and have a superintendent who can be accountable to a bunch of different people in government positions. It is a government entity. The county library or the city library, those can also be governmental organizations that are funded by a government, but may look like they kind of operate a little bit like a nonprofit does, but they're not organized like a nonprofit. They're organized as a governmental agency, right? The the other big buckets, you have government agencies, governmental entities, and then we also have for-profit business, right? And so for-profit business is, as we know, has a lot of different corporate structures, right? So it could be a sole proprietorship, it could be a limited licensing corporation, it could be a regular sort of corporation that's structured in a way that is a little more standard than an LLC. There's a lot of different structures, but at the end of the day, for-profit companies are there to make a profit. They're there to be financially solvent and to make money for their shareholders or for their owners. And governmental agencies are often accountable to ultimately voters and to people who are in a place of supervising governmental agencies. There's often a lot of public outcry or fervor around some of these divisive issues. I remember in my hometown not too long ago, during the pandemic, there was a widespread outcry around some of the book buying policies of the local library, and it became really quickly a political issue, one that involved the local head of the county because the library was a county organization. There was a board, the library board, that was involved in this. Lots of public outcry about the choices of books that were being put into the children's section of the library and a bunch of community debate, really strong feelings on either side of the issue. And really quickly, it became clear that the voters were the ones that this whole issue was accountable to, right? People who were their tax dollars were funding this. So you have governmental organizations, you have for-profit organizations, and they have different accountability structures, different things that push them and pull them. And then we have nonprofits. And in the US, you may hear the term like a nonprofit 501c3, and that's a technical term for the kind of organization it is. And nonprofits have maybe the best way to think about it right now, and this might change a little bit, is that they have two kind of defining features to them. One is their organizational structure, and and two is the kind of motivation, the thing that drives the organization forward, their reason why. So first, why don't we talk a little bit about structure? In the United States, a 501c3 status, and I think there are a couple other sub-statuses for nonprofits. You have some classifications around being faith-based or education-based, some of those pieces. But in the nonprofit category, there are a couple important things that happen here. So one is that nonprofit organizations are generally tax exempt from paying U.S. taxes. And this is important because it shows up a lot. It means that nonprofit organizations aren't needing to worry about paying taxes on the revenues that come into their organization. Now, just because a nonprofit has that in their name, right? Nonprofit doesn't actually mean that they don't make money. It doesn't mean that they don't bring in revenues. This was something that surprised me when I first started thinking about it. I was like, oh, well, of course they have to make money to pay the lights and pay their employees and their staff and all of these things and run their programs. But the name nonprofit kind of tripped me up for a while before I was really involved in the world. And the reality is that nonprofits have income streams as well, whether it's from selling products or selling something that they are making some big companies that you'll have heard of that are structured as companies, but their profits go into foundations. I think that's the way it's organized for both of these. But companies like Newman's Own, right? The profits for that go into a nonprofit, and they're used on behalf of charitable causes, right? Hershey's, the candy bar company, right? The profits from Hershey's go to support a nonprofit school, an orphanage sort of situation that cares for kids in need, right? So you have sometimes these models that bring in revenue of some kind. They have to bring in revenue of some kind. Some are very dependent on donors. A lot of faith-based organizations, like a local church or a mosque or a synagogue, are going to be pretty reliant on individual contributions from members, right? Um, but then you may also have others that operate on government contracts. So you'll have nonprofits sometimes that contract with the government to provide services. Some food banks do this. Others providing, especially social services, will have contracts with local, state, federal government agencies to provide a certain service. And that is a form of revenue as well. You also have, um, in addition to the grassroots individual donor income stream, there's also the really large philanthropist stream, like Mackenzie Scott, the former spouse of Jeff Bezos, and she's been an incredibly important player in the nonprofit philanthropy world, and she follows a different model than a lot of major donors do, rather than putting a lot of stipulations on the gift and a lot of kind of rules or control that she retains over the gift. She often just gives it with no strings attached. And sometimes these organizations don't even know that they've been considered for the gift until they receive word that they've received it, right? So lots of different income streams for nonprofits. But again, the big issue here is that this money is not going to enrich individual shareholders or owners. It's going back into the mission work of the nonprofit. So that's why it is a nonprofit, is not because it doesn't have revenue streams, but because all the money that comes in is going to achieve the mission or the goal of the organization. And that brings us to that second piece, that motivation. Um, Nonprofits have to exist for the public good. And in their organizing documents, they have to justify why they exist, what they're doing that's in the public's interest. Because right, they're being let off the hook from taxes, they're being given this special status. So what are they contributing to the community that is worthwhile? And for a lot of states, that goes through the Secretary of State's office. Not always. Every state is a little bit different on how they grant nonprofit status. I've gone through the process twice of founding nonprofits. It's a lot of paperwork and it involves a lot of regulatory sort of aspects, right? So I founded one when I was in high school and another one in my mid 20s. And in both cases, you have to pull together a board of directors. There are bylaws that are written that structure how governance runs in the organization. And you have to articulate this purpose that you exist for, this um, public benefit. And that's more than just an organizational kind of document. It's something that should then provide a foundation for the rest of the organization to be built on, right? So think of um, some of the nonprofits that you've come into contact with. What are some of the reasons they exist? What does that bedrock look like for them? Maybe some of you volunteer with a local youth sports club, or team, right? So, the back when I was a kid, there was an organization that did soccer teams. Hey, excuse me, and there'd be a lot of different ways you could volunteer for that by being a coach or a referee or a bunch of different things, right? And that organization existed to provide affordable, accessible sports for young people in the community, to help encourage getting outside and being active and healthy, right? There's a lot of different ways of looking at the work that's done by nonprofits and trying to understand what their why is. So we have the structure and the why that give shape to these nonprofit organizations. And then we also see in the nonprofit sector, there are a bunch of different kind of subgroups, whether it's education or faith-based organizations or social service organizations or arts and humanities-based nonprofits, funders themselves, large nonprofit like community organizations, right? We're going to talk some more about these in the coming weeks, but it's helpful here to note that the nonprofit sector is complex and there is a lot of variety, and there is it spans the whole spectrum of the kinds of things that nonprofits do, and it also spans the ideological spectrum of why they exist and what their mission is. I recommend too, if you're reading the Powell and Bromley book, the chapter two is really fascinating with the history of nonprofits. We don't have a lot of time to get into that, unfortunately, here in our class time, but it gives a really good overview of how nonprofits came about in the US and how those have grown and developed over time. The history of philanthropy is really, really interesting there. If any of you are reading that and want to make a comment in the discussion board, I'd look forward to reading that. That's just a really interesting chapter. So we've talked a little bit about what the nonprofit sector is, but I'd also like to look at some of the other book as well. So this is the Crutchfield and Grant book, and this book is really interesting because it's focusing very specifically on practices, and they narrow it down to six practices that are common between highly effective, highly impactful nonprofit organizations across a variety of different fields and approaches. Right. And these six practices are pulled apart in more detail in each of the chapters. As we get along, you'll see these. But here at the very beginning, I think it's helpful to briefly touch on them. So these six practices that these researchers have identified, again, across 12 different organizations from different parts of the nonprofit sector, they definitely did their research on this. It was over the course of 2 years. They've regularly updated this in subsequent editions of the book. But these six practices are work with government and advocate for policy change in addition to providing services, right? So work hand in hand with government and advocate. And this is important because sometimes organizations shy away from advocacy and they're focused on the ground sort of help, but advocacy is important too. Policy change makes a big difference and it shapes the way organizations are able to operate. The second is to harness market forces and see a powerful partner in business rather than framing them as an enemy to be distinct or ignored. This idea that you can do well while doing good has become more and more popular in business circles. I have some friends who are really successful in the business world, and they often approach philanthropy and giving in a strategic sort of way. They want to know, hey, what is in this for me as I'm giving? And how is this giving going to be effective to seeing the goals that I want to see implemented? Right. And it's not always just as a person with a deep background in nonprofits, I get a little bit angsty around, well, that's greedy or selfish, and that's not the point here. The point is being able to speak the language of people who are in the business world. And you'll see that often it's this focus on results and how can my money that I'm giving help me, but also help do the kind of good that I want to see in the world. And that results focus is often a hallmark, not always, but often a hallmark of the way that the business world engages with the nonprofit sector. So something to keep in mind there. And making that pitch that you can do well while doing good. A third is to create meaningful experiences for individual supporters and convert them into evangelists for the cause, right? So, how do you engage with individual donors, with volunteers, and to make them feel like they're a part of this movement? And then help empower them to be able to share with their friends and the people around them about the work that you're doing in the nonprofit, right? Then the next fourth one is to build and nurture nonprofit networks, treating other groups not as competitors for scarce resources, but as allies instead. I've been in several nonprofit sectors and kind of ecosystems where this was not the case, where cooperation was not something that people regularly engaged with. Uh, there's one place in particular where I'm thinking of a community where I was on the senior leadership of this nonprofit, and the kind of other nonprofits that were in our same space, and there were about a dozen of us in this medium-sized community. They often saw it was a competitive sort of environment where cooperation wasn't encouraged. The resources, money, and stakeholders, volunteers were fiercely contested over, and uh, there were times where other organizations would come in and intentionally kind of undercut what we were doing to try to siphon off resources. And at times I felt really defensive of that. There were times as I was in this kind of newer leadership position, reporting to the head of the organization, there were times where I would get really frustrated. And I'd be like, "This is not fair. We need to do something." And I'm really thankful that the person I worked for at the time was really intentional to say, "No, Preston, we're not going to respond with that same kind of protectionist or scarce resource mentality. Instead, we're going to be generous." And that was really, to me, it seemed really groundbreaking. And I know there are other organizations that do this a lot, but I got to see this leader lead through generosity. Right? We would frequently be a part of an organization that tried to bring these other organizations to the table and talk. The leader of our organization served as the president of this organization and would frequently give opportunities and send resources towards other organizations and lead through generosity. It was very collaborative in that sense. We would often allow our facility to be used by other nonprofits that were in our space that needed it at times, and to share resources and even pitch in more than what was our fair share. And I learned through this that it does give results, right? In the long run, we built trusting relationships with these other organizations and these other leaders that were in these organizations. And although it wasn't ever perfect, it definitely, as I saw that kind of engagement happened, it brought the temperature down and it brought us to places where the people we were collaborating with, the organizations we were collaborating with, saw collective wins, right? Not just kind of a zero-sum game. So that's really important. Um, the fifth uh, the fifth of the six practices here is to adapt to the changing environment, to be as innovative and nimble as the organization is strategic. So you can have the best strategy in the world with everything planned out, but when your plan hits the ground, it's going to come into contact with problems, right? People are going to fail, right? There's going to be maybe it's a director, someone who's really important to making a vision come to life, and they're going to leave the organization, or you're going to find yourself dealing with a reputational crisis, something that's happened in the organization that you have to deal with, or there's an opportunity to make a big investment in a new piece of property or equipment or something like that, but you have to raise the money for it, right? There are always going to be these opportunities that could be challenges, but that require an agility and a creativity to encounter them. And then finally, sharing leadership. So, not hoarding resources like we talked about, but also just not hoarding leadership or opportunities, being quick to share that and to empower others to also take the lead. And really, what the authors are working to kind of bring us from is an organizational mindset, which really dominated the nonprofit scene in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. They're trying to move us away from that to a relational mindset, to this idea that nonprofits and government entities and for-profits, they're run by people, right? They're not just this nebulous thing that doesn't exist. Although in business law and structure, these corporations are legal persons, right? They can buy property and do things like that. The reality is that real people are embedded in these organizations, and we can create relationships, we can create trust, we can create moments of understanding and empathy towards one another. And that's really important for this kind of work. The other piece to this is not only having a relational mindset, but understanding that a nonprofit's job in many ways is to build platforms for connections, right? To share ideas, information, to influence others, to connect dots to issues, industries, and sectors, to help address needs that are in whatever sector the nonprofit is working in, right? But this idea of a platform is really important because it gives a sense of what are we building on and how are we bringing others into the conversation. The authors have a very collaborative approach, and you're going to see this throughout the book. They especially focus on bringing nonprofits into conversation with governmental entities, with businesses, with um, uh, different members of the public sector, of the public in general, coming together and finding synergy in that. Yeah, I enjoyed the reading for this week, and I do whenever I'm going through this class with you all. It's one of my favorite classes to teach because there's the opportunity to really dive deep into understanding more and more what organizations are doing that works in the nonprofit sector and what organizations are doing that don't work. And you're going to find, I wish I'm coming to the end of my time here. I wish I could talk some more about all the things that are in these chapters, but I recommend really highly for you in the book for everybody here. The In addition to the six excellent standards, which we're going to be unpacking, they also talk about common myths around nonprofit excellency that they've debunked that don't have a lot of relevance. And they're really good ones. They're ones that help you realize that there are a lot of ways of doing effective nonprofit work. And the stories in that book in particular are just really impactful and really interesting. So I encourage you do the reading, uh, dive a little bit deeper into this issue. And then next week, we're going to be talking some more in Unit 2 about the structure of nonprofits and expanding the conversation a little bit more. All right. Thank you for your time. As always, again, if you have questions, please reach out to me and I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can. One note I do want to make note of is that I will be traveling this coming week. And so I'm accessible as always by appointment, but there will be a moment where I'm moving office hours, which are normally on Wednesdays. I'll be moving that this coming week to Friday, right? So Friday at the typical time on the syllabus, I believe it's 11 a.m. on Wednesday is usually our time, but we're going to be moving that to Friday of this next coming week during Unit 1. Thank you for your flexibility. And if you need to meet with me before that, I am happy to talk with you. Just send me an email and we can set up a time. Take care and good luck as you're studying.